canvas of how I see South Australia. And I do that in a way to set a framework for the conversation that I want to have. And none of this is original. I've borrowed this from the myriad of people that have worked for me and that I've worked with. But the way that I look at South Australia is to think of it in terms of three broad geographic zones. And the first of those is and probably the most important from a conservation perspective, is the arid zone or the pastoral zone or the rangelands, whatever you want to call that. The 60%, probably 70% of our state that is outside Goyder's line, if you like. Now, I'm not too fussed about definitions, but the arid zone, and if you look at that arid zone, I subdivide it into three parts. There's the part that's largely given over to pastoralism, and that's about 40% of the state is under pastoral use. Another 20% of the state in that arid zone is Aboriginal land, so APY, Maralinga, and then perhaps 15 million hectares of the arid zone is now in the conservation system. So that's the arid zone. Then I come south across Goyder's line into what you might call the agricultural zone, and in large part that's farming country, with perhaps 5 million of those 20 million of the 25 million hectares being in the conservation reserve. Close enough. And then the third zone is the coastal and marine waters that are within the 3 mile limit. And again, in terms of scale, if South Australia is about 100 million hectares, as I said, large proportion of that is in the arid zone, about 20%, 25% in the agricultural zone. And then you've got this coastal marine zone, which occupies about 60 million hectares. So 100 million hectares of land, 60 million hectares in the state's coastal and marine zone. And again, if you look at the way that zone is, or that zone is used, up until very recently, most of that was open to commercial fishing and recreational fishing, and in recent times, about 6% of our coastal waters are now in sanctuary zones within a marine park system. And I'll come back and talk about that. But again, what I'm trying to do is just sketch a bit of a broad picture of South Australia, which then allows me to talk about changes that have taken place and are taking place. And if you look at the sweep of human occupation, Aboriginal history dates back, 60,000, let's say 60,000, it's argued that it could be as great as 80 or 90,000, but for a very, very long time. And if you think about that in terms of generations, it is an enormous period of time. If you think that European settlement dates in South Australia from 1836 or thereabouts, and you think, what is it, a couple of hundred years versus 60,000 years, there's this enormous period of Aboriginal occupation. And again, if you take that period, 60,000, about 4,000 years ago, 4,500 years ago, there was a significant migration out of India into Australia. And if you look at the DNA of Aboriginal people, about 10% of that has its origin in that Indian migration. So it's a very significant migration. And the other association with that period is the introduction of the dingo, which presumably had a very significant impact on the biological systems in Australia. And perhaps there were around 500,000 Aboriginal inhabitants. again, you know, argue between 200,000 and 1 million, but let's say 500,000. And in large part leading a semi-nomadic hunter-gatherer existence. Now, again, there's argument about that, as there is about all of these things. And you would have to say, if you saw that as an ecosystem, then the top predator was the human for a very, very long period of time. And the other observation, and I'm generalising, the other observation that I would make about that period of occupation is that the Aboriginals' use of fire was enormously significant in shaping the landscape. Now, again, that's arguable, but I think there's sufficient evidence to say that fire was such an important part of our landscape up until settlement. And if you look at Kangaroo Island, where Aboriginal people died out post the flooding of the land bridge, and you see Kangaroo Island's ecology without Aboriginal people for a very extensive period of time, it does, I think, support my thesis or contention that fire, human-induced fire, is such an important part of our landscape.